know from the data that Janet showed a little bit earlier, we haven't quite achieved that yet, but I think we're on the way. Whenever I'm talking about the careers for researchers, my starting point is that our researchers are amongst the most talented people in society. And that, of course, means that they really ought to be highly sought after, as we live in a world where we're constantly being told that talent is in very, very high demand and that employers are struggling to attract the talent that they need. But I know if you're a researcher, it doesn't always feel like that when you're thinking about how you're going to shape your future. It's only natural that many of our researchers see their future in academia, and indeed that's very important because of course we want more researchers in academia. And they may be thinking about a research focused role, which may of course mean competing for funded research fellowships, or they may be thinking about becoming an academic, which in most instances of course means a mix of teaching and research. And if your heart is set on one of those paths, then you should be shaping your personal and professional development plan along the lines that give you yourself the best chance of succeeding in what's actually a pretty competitive arena. But academia is not for everyone. And I think it's important that we say outright that deciding to move away from academia is very definitely not a failure. And I think sometimes researchers feel they're sort of letting the show down if they decide to move away from academia. And that's not the case at all. You're simply using the enormous range of skills that you've developed as a researcher in a different arena. And really, when you think about the skills you develop as a researcher beyond the knowledge and expertise in your particular area of focus, they're enormous, and I could reel off a whole list, and I'm happy to do it afterwards, but I'd be talking for a long time. But I would say to researchers, I think it's really important that you talk to your supervisors, your mentors, and your careers department sooner rather than later to find out about some of the many avenues that are open to you that could lead to a rewarding career outside academia. So to whet your appetite, we've got some excellent speakers who are going to tell you a little bit about different arenas. We have Joe Marshall, who's the Chief Executive of the National Centre for Universities and Businesses, better known as NCUB, who will talk about career openings in industry. We've got Claire Meara from the Government Office of Science, who will explore careers in government. We've got Joanna Thornborough from the British Academy, who will focus on career openings for PGRs and postdoctoral researchers studying the very important SHAPE areas. And for those of you who aren't up with the latest of acronyms, this is social sciences, humanities and the arts for people and the economy, a very, very important area. And last but by no means least, Freya Robb from the Science Media Centre, who will talk about careers opportunities in the media. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand swiftly over to Joe to start talking to us about careers in industry. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Julia. And without wishing to sort of repeat many of the kind of sage words from Julia, I think there is, my opening comments really pick up on Julia's point about this being a very binary discussion between, and almost the title of the session invariably isn't going to be has to sort of evoke some emotions, but you know, beyond academia does sort of bring us into, you know, without over analysing these words and sort of suggesting what UK might have meant by them, but actually there is this kind of feel, have we failed by leaving academia? Have we failed as we are not good enough for the academy? And that, you know, is it scary outside of the academy and, you know, the world, you know, we know what it's like in the academy, and the academy evokes its own sort of sets of emotions, this learned collegiate society of scholars all working in a kind of like-minded way with tenured positions, with no challenges to their career or and other things. And for many of us who have worked in probably academia, as well as beyond, there are pros and cons of life inside the academy as much as there are cons in the sort of outside of the academy. And I was about to fall into that other trap of my other favourite cliche in this world is beyond the academy and all of the kind of connotations. The academy has and then you have the real world. And I think that I think all of this is fraught with a set of language. But I want to just pick up on another point that Julia made that I think is absolutely fundamental to where both the economy is going, but actually a distinction that I will probably say is not just about the skills that you bring as a researcher. Actually, what we are now looking at is a knowledge economy where we are desperately in need of new ideas, new thinking, new ways, and actually for many businesses, they genuinely want not only the skills, the training, the kind of developed expertise, but actually they often are interested in your domain knowledge expertise. So this isn't the sort of transferable skills piece. This isn't about what you kind of bring as a kind of postgraduate researcher. You know, many of the big businesses that we work with on a day-to-day business are hiring anthropologists. They are hiring, as tech developers, philosophers. They are hiring social scientists to come in and work in pharmaceutical companies. The kind of delineation that we often have is that, and I'm sure Joanna will talk much more eloquently than I will on this subject, you know, is this kind of, oh, you've got transferable skills and look what you can do in the sort of STEM subjects. Actually, many industries, many sectors, and certainly in an area, in a part of the economy now where we are looking at opportunities where we bring together different disciplines, you know, the kind of classic Apple and iPhone things, which is much more as about design as it is about technology. This requires designers, it requires people who understand psychology, that understand, you know, how sociologically we all work and operate together. These are domain knowledge expertise rather than just these kind of transferable skills. There is, for those out there who can, you know, in preparation for today, I Googled beyond academia and I found an array of images out there, often of very stressed looking PGRs and very and storm clouds, and a sort of invariably a world in which the industry, you know, is you're possibly selling out or you're doing other things. And so my second comment really is that actually our economy is changing. The UK economy, and another presentation I can talk much more about the kind of government policies in this space, lots of stuff about the 2.4% of the GDP being spent on R&D. But the UK no longer has a big heavy industries. It no longer has a big significant manufacturing base. It is based entirely on more and more based on our ideas and our intellectual know-how. And therefore, actually, for many businesses out there, they are looking for really bright people who can come in and work for them. Talked about some of the sectors and industries already, but I think increasingly this binary divide between kind of doing research only in universities and doing kind of at best applied and translational work in industry is becoming less and less binary. We are now seeing lots of people moving seamlessly between the two, and I think increasingly they want people who, you know, have done masters and PhDs and other skills, and so I do think we need to sort of think that our economy is changing, and therefore I think more and more opportunities will come through. And my final comment, just to wrap this up, which is a small word in the title of this session, which is about paths. It's about, with my northern tones, it's about pathways between industry and academia. And I think one of the things that we often think of is we no longer live in a career, we no longer, regardless of what today's topic was about, this is no longer about doing education at the beginning, spending 30 or 40 years in a single or one or two industries, carriage clock, retirement. We now live where we are expected not only to change jobs, but actually often reinvent ourselves 3 or 4 times during our career. And actually, one of the things that I think clearly the government is, and many universities and employers are thinking about, is how do we make it easier to manage both the talent flow between academia and industry in the world that I operate in, but actually how do we also look at some of the sort of disincentives? You know, we've just seen the REF exercise in my day, showing my age as 10 years as a sort of senior lecturer in universities. It was all about REE and scoring kind of REE-able publications. Not much has changed, just the name at one level, but obviously impact is a much bigger part of the agenda now. But actually, if I wanted to go back into academia, I don't have the kind of credit or, you know, the sets of things that would have immediately have got me the promotions that I would have got 10 years ago. So what are the things that stop me going back? But I think what we do need to think about is that at different points in people's careers, there are real opportunities to push boundaries that actually you wouldn't want to stay in industry or academia for the entirety of your career, and you will get better and richer for moving around. We just don't quite have it as being as porous as possible. So my sort of overarching comment would be that I think we need to stop thinking in sort of very binary terms. What I've tried to do in this kind of short presentation is actually use some of my PhD training, deconstruct some of the words, challenge some of the assumptions, think about the actual evidence that's out there. Some of my colleagues at NCUB get frustrated that I will talk about validity and reliability and the distinction between the two. It is entrained in me. I still think I am still a researcher. I just don't work in a university. And I also not there just to sort of watch what's going on in universities. I genuinely bring those skills to my day-to-day job on a day-to-day basis. And I think I am hopefully a better both colleague and employer as a result of it. But I think it is about challenging some of those assumptions, and there are an array of opportunities. We just need to get rid of some of the packages. So hopefully, Julia, that sets the scene.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. That was great, and it certainly does set the scene very well indeed. So let's move now to, I think we're going to go to my notes to Claire next. So Claire, over to you.
Thanks very much, Julia. Can I just check, Julia, a question back to you in terms of the audience here? So when we're talking about researchers, is it all kind of subject areas? My presentation is heavily focused on science and engineering, so very much apologies to those who aren't in science and engineering. But what I'll do is I'll try and weave in subject matters related to other topics. So I've just come up with a presentation, and what I've tried to do in the presentation is provide tangible links for you all to actually go and pursue. What I will do is, after I've talked through, I will add some links that are probably more relevant to people doing social sciences and wider areas like that. But a bit of background about me. So my name's Chimera. I was in research for a bit, but just did a PhD, so never went into doing postgraduate, and then I went straight into government work. And my team, I lead a team in the Government Office for Science, and we look at building the capability of scientists and engineers across government. So I'm part of something called the GSE network. In government, what we have are these big networks called professions. So what I can do is signpost a couple of other types of professions which might be relevant to a broader base of you. So I've very much focused on the science and engineering aspect, but what I'll do is include that to be much broader. So I'll give you some more links for that. So what I wanted to do was kind of show essentially what the vision is for scientists and engineers within government, and that's to make a real difference through science and engineering. But that is very much true of all areas of expertise. It's basically about that emphasis of the benefit of your career being that impact that you'll get to see. You'll get to see your work integrated into policy and deployed and that kind of thing. What I've provided here is a bit of a life cycle, and I do think this relates to lots of subject areas within government. So as Joe was saying, it is a big government priority at the moment to do with attracting high-skilled people. So we have something called the Government Declaration of Reform, and that it sets out really high-level ambitions. It's got actions that are owned by permanent secretaries, and one of those is all about attracting highly skilled individuals. And another big thing that government's really concentrating on is porosity. So that idea of more flexible movement between industries, like Joe was saying, so gaining experience in government, taking that back to academia and research, which I know can be difficult because there's different career metrics, but we're trying to come up with lots of different ways to make placements and that kind of thing possible. That's a big focus in my team at the moment. So some of the kind of aspects of this life cycle just shows sort of the different types of work that you can do. So as a researcher, in general, I think horizon scanning is a big skill that you bring. So again, this will probably be more on the transferable skill side, but really directly related to the fact that you are used to looking out for those upcoming topics. So for instance, the Department for Transport, very focused on future thinking, those real big challenges that are going to face this country in the future and already are facing, but looking forward and knowing that, you know, you have those skills as a researcher to keep appraised of the situation. You'll be very up to date in terms of those academic journals and the way people are thinking about these kind of big problems and bringing that into policy. Something that research is very good at is also defining and designing the kind of solutions. So breaking it down, if there needs to be some sort of experiment, it's about breaking down these massive complex problems that cross many government departments, many different organisations, and actually just setting out a rigorous approach to that. Then something that we do in government, and I really want to highlight this later, is a lot about creating the actual evidence. So if you weren't interested in so much as using your transferable skills, as Joe was saying, but really focusing on actually retaining that specialism, you can do that within government. And it is about creating and the genesis of that evidence. Then that goes into implementing in government. I think that might be what most people think of government roles, is working with policy professionals. So either you yourself would be owning a piece of policy, or you'd be working with policy makers to translate your area of expertise. So you might be bringing like a psychology or a behavioural science kind of aspect to a piece of policy. How is that going to operate within the public? You might be doing a big piece of analysis and actually analysing data, or you could be a scientist or engineer who's got that evidence and you need to translate it to policymakers. Then I think something else that researchers are incredibly good at and valuable is the evaluating and maintaining phase of this cycle. So really making sure that when policy is being created, is it robust? Are there clear metrics that you'll be able to evaluate going forward, and making sure these things have longevity? So a lot of this is transferable skills, but also there is a big space within government for you to use your specialist research area, your domain knowledge, as it were. So again, this is very focused on science and engineering, but I do think it applies to the other areas of specialism. So for science and engineering specifically, we've defined a career framework, and I'll provide some links to some other kind of career frameworks that government have for different expertise areas. But the way that we define our careers is in 4 main camps. So we've got affiliate, so you're kind of affiliated to our profession. That's really kind of generalist roles, so where you'd be using your skills but really transferable. So you'd be in a kind of purely policy-based role, for example, and you'd be bringing those general principles of horizon scanning or systems thinking or research skills all the way through to deep specialist roles. And so I've kind of put a graph on here to do with whether you're focused on one area of your expertise or whether you might apply it broadly. So obviously the further you tend to go in your research career, the more specific you will get, but you might find yourself in a general team where you are, for instance, the behavioural scientist general consultant. So you would take those principles and apply them to a broad range of topics. Or you might find yourself in sort of like a carbon capture team, and you would end up using general physics principles or chemistry principles for a broad range of topics. So still in that technical sphere, but a bit broader, all the way through to you are focused on your single application. You have been directly hired because of your research area. So it really does range. So for the rest of the presentation, I just wanted to go into really practical ways that you can actually integrate into government. So for generalist roles, so I've put, like, for example, policy, but there are lots of different types of roles. There's lots of operational roles in government as well. I think there's kind of 2 routes that you could go down. So one, you might be interested in more gaining experience, just to kind of test what government's like, see if you actually like it, if it's suitable for you. And then I've tried to give some practical advice for actually if you wanted to go and look at roles. So in terms of gaining experience, the good news is there are lots of schemes out there for researchers at various stages of your career. So as in, it could just be like as a postdoctoral student or as an early academic researcher, all the way through to being a fellow. But there's some knowledge exchange broker partnerships. I put a couple of examples there, but CAPE and UPenn are groups of universities. So I know for CAPE, to be applicable for some of their schemes, you have to be a member of one of their universities, and I think it's a group of 5 universities. For UPenn, I'm not sure how open that is, but it'd be good if you just went and explored those. But the idea is they are knowledge brokers between academia and government, and the idea is to get researchers from all types of fields into government for placements, so they can get that taster and they can gain an awareness of what government's like and how we actually operate. The Royal Society is another great area, which is probably more science specific. But they do things, there's a pairing scheme, which is only like a week-long scheme, but you're paired with a civil servant. And the idea is that the academics get a chance to kind of almost interview the civil servant, but you can see how Parliament works, and there's kind of really nice tours of the House of Commons and that kind of thing. But then they also have a policy associate scheme, so you can go and learn a bit about policy and how that actually works. Similarly, I think this is the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. They have a similar sort of scheme for academics, but the UKRI is a really great place. I would go on their website and have a look at the careers. So I think these ones, they might be applicable to all the branches of the UKRI. Some of the links might be to do with specifically science and engineering, but it's different stages of your career, so future leaders all the way down to internships. And I would just go and have a look at those if you're interested. So they can range from 3 months to a year, and there's different types. Every single one is funded in a different way. So some they have funding already, some you might have to apply for funding. But so I would go and have an explore and see if you're interested. In terms of applying for roles directly, I think the civil service website can be quite daunting at first, just the way that we refer to jobs and things like that. So what I've done is provided a link to something called Success Profiles. Every single job advert that you apply, that job that you apply for in the civil service, and I would recommend Googling essentially government departments and organisations. And I will send these slides around afterwards so you can have the links ready. I recommend just really Googling government departments and organisations and just having a look through to see, get an idea. Each one will have its own website and you can have a look about the kind of things they do. But the civil service job website is the main place for all the jobs there. And each one will require you to do something called behaviours. So these are essentially competencies. And my biggest bit of advice is follow the STAR format. So situation, task, action and result. But again, that's on the slides, just a key tip there. So then the other type of role, so that's kind of general transferable skills, policy type roles. But also I just really want to reiterate, there's a lot of avenues for you to go down if you wanted to retain specialist areas of research. So again, apologies, this is very science and engineering focused, but this will equally apply to social researchers as well. So I've provided some links here that were done by the Royal Society where they've listed all the public sector research establishments, so PSREs, and they cover a broad base, and these are actual labs within government who are doing direct research. So again, I've just provided a list here. I would go through them, but I think I've run over a little bit. But I just wanted to show you, for example, there's a wide range. So the APHA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, they employ copious amounts of vets, for example, and they use those and they work with them for their expertise, all the way through to the Met Office, who employ a lot of computational modelers, a lot of theoretical physics that goes on, and those kind of things. So Health and Safety Executive, they have a broad range of researchers, because a lot of them are required to provide evidence in court, for example, and those kind of things. So in terms of gaining experience for the more specialist roles, again, we do have actually a secondment programme called STEM Futures, but that is for STEM type roles. So I would inquire, if you're interested in doing a kind of technical placement, I would kind of suss out from your university if you're a partner of STEM Futures, and that just might be one way in. But my biggest tip is to really go look on the previous slide, see those public sector research establishments, and then go to their individual website for information, because a lot of them have things like graduate schemes or academic engagement schemes and that kind of thing. Similarly for roles, the civil service jobs, they display roles from departments, whereas a lot of these public sector research establishments are connected to a department, but they themselves are part of the public sector, so their roles wouldn't appear on the civil service website. So for instance, if you'd like a job at NPL, the National Physical Laboratory, it's best to go to their website directly because they do recruitment individually. So that, again, just a bit of a practical tip when you're looking for kind of roles. So that's my presentation, and I'll pass back to you, Julia.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Claire. That was absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure interested a load of people. So let's move swiftly on to Joanna.
I think I'm unmuted now. Yes, thank you very much. As Julia mentioned earlier, I'm from the British Academy, so I'm very much pivoting from more of a science focus to very much a shape subjects focus now. And thinking particularly about, I suppose, the paths bit of the title of today's session, and making that transition with obviously a focus on the shape researchers, but for those in postgraduate and early career researcher sort of stages of their careers as well. And I should say from the outset, this is partly for my own personal experience as well, because I started my doctorate with the intention of pursuing an academic career, and by the time I'd got to the end of it, I was less sure that's what I wanted to do. So I spent a couple of years as an early career researcher, teaching, taking on various roles in my institution, trying to write, possibly not as much as I should have done, and then eventually decided on a career in policy and moving into that. And I should say from personal experience and looking at others around me in my organisation and what their backgrounds are as well, I would say that my doctoral training and background as a medieval history researcher are very well suited to what I do now. So I think I'm going to be sort of reiterating quite a lot of what's been spoken about over the course of the day so far, and picking up on points that Joe and others and Julia so far have made in this session as well. So we know an increasing number of postgraduate research students are looking at employment beyond academia after their doctorate. That's a very obvious fact, and the jobs market for academia is obviously very highly competitive. Research funding is something, unfortunately, that will largely be awarded to the few rather than the many. The precise figure at present I'm not 100% sure of, but certainly when the British Academy published a report looking at good practice and careers guidance for PGRs back in 2020, the figure was around 70% or so of doctoral graduates across all subject areas, not just shape, were leaving academia within 3.5 years of graduating. Obviously, there's many stories and different reasons underlying this figure, but a thing to focus on, I think, is what a large pool of very highly skilled and highly motivated individuals that represents. So I really want to sort of emphasize the high level skills that shape study in particular develops. So things like forming, framing and evidencing arguments in a reasoned and balanced way, the ability to synthesize and analyze a range of sources and a large amount of data, translating and making the complex and uncertain more understandable, problem solving, and as we've already heard, domain knowledge expertise and horizon scanning as well. I'd like to pick up as well on something that Joe has touched on already as well. I think language really does make a difference when we're talking about research career paths. And like Joe, I'm very pleased today that the session uses beyond academia rather than the sort of unnecessarily binary and I think unhelpful distinction between sort of academic and non-academic, which is certainly sort of language that was more familiar to me when I was a postgraduate researcher. I'd very much like to think that we can move beyond a suggestion that anything other than an academic career is a plan B or somehow a failure for a researcher. And similarly, that if you choose to pursue a different career path, then there's no way back to academia for you later on, and you've somehow entered a sort of parallel universe of employment. I just don't think that's the case. I think it's also important for researchers to think about language and beneficial for them to help think about how to phrase the skills and attributes that they've developed and to appreciate and articulate the range of those skills which they possess in a way that is perhaps slightly less academic than they're used to for a lot of their training. And this is also helpful for employers in various sectors as well to understand and appreciate the highly capable individuals that they could be better tapping into as a resource. The aforementioned report that we published in 2020 was accompanied by a number of case studies which we'd had written for us by doctoral graduates and early career researchers who'd gone on to pursue varied career paths. We asked them to sketch out their career pathway from doctoral research onwards, irregardless of the stage at which they'd moved beyond academia. So including understanding how their own knowledge, skills and experience had developed during their studies and after, and also offering personal insights on how doctoral students can succeed beyond traditional academic career routes, as well as also any advice they would give to employers on why they should consider recruiting more doctoral graduates from SHAPE subjects. Not all of our case study participants had pursued their PhD full-time or indeed gone straight into their PhD from undergraduate or master's degrees. And it was very nice for me as well, looking at the range of employment sectors that they represent and seeing that they were just as varied as other academy reports that we've presented, looking at career pathways for graduates from taught degrees as well. Importantly, what we wanted to present, and I think is important with this kind of information, is it was very much a warts and all account we asked them for. So reflecting both on the opportunities and the barriers as well, very much with the knowledge that the transition from a doctorate or academic research pathway to one beyond academia is not always easy for a variety of reasons. I think in the same way that it's important for researchers at postgraduate and early career stages to see that for every paper that a mid-career or senior academic has had accepted, or every grant that they've been awarded, there's a sort of there's a story behind that of various sort of knockbacks and other things along the way. And I think honest and balanced guidance when approaching career paths is really what's very important. And if we're thinking about broader ambitions for increasing and meeting R&D targets, we've heard quite a lot about this already today, but it's really going to require the support and development of well-rounded researchers across a range of disciplines, but also industry and employers understanding and appreciating how best to make use of these highly trained and skilled researchers as well. We've spoken a little bit about placements and internships as well, but before the pandemic, the proportion of respondents to the postgraduate research experience survey reporting that they'd had apologies for the noisy road noise in the background, reporting that they'd had opportunities for placements or internships was already quite low, I think around 10%. And in subsequent years since, it shifted very, very slightly. So I haven't delved into any subject or discipline breakdowns for this, but what it does seem like is a wasted opportunity, both for the researchers themselves and for those sectors who might benefit from knowledge exchange and a wider range of subject disciplines. Postgraduate researchers and early career researchers should have careers advice and development, which is really sort of tailored to people with their highly developed skills and different levels of life experience as well. A lot of existing provision is aimed primarily at students on taught degrees, and so really has less relevance or very sort of different relevance for this cohort. I appreciate obviously PGRs and ECRs as well are very different too, but I don't have the time to go into that in so much detail. But really it's unrealistic to expect individuals who are specialising in such different areas of research to all want, need or require the same thing when it comes to careers development and guidance and their options. Something like the Research Development Concordat makes very clear that such development should also be continuous. Many postgraduate and postdoctoral researchers, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, regularly cite time constraints as a major barrier to engagement with training and development. And it's important to acknowledge that the doctoral cycle and the academic year, as well as we all know, has particular pinch points requiring much more emotional and mental workload from people. And this is something that obviously is compounded for those with additional responsibilities. Also, I'd like to sort of highlight that I think ownership and co-creation of career development and guidance is really essential for overcoming a lot of obstacles that we've been talking about. It's a key principle which has also underpinned the development of the Early Career Researcher Network, which the Academy is currently piloting in partnership with the Wilson Foundation, and which I'm happy to provide some links to, but I will also be talking about in a session a little bit later this afternoon. So the activities, events and training offered there are really developed in response to what early career researchers themselves are saying that they want to have, what they feel that they're currently missing or don't otherwise have access to, whether because they don't have funding, access to doctoral training partnerships, the nature of the contract they're on, whatever it may be. And this includes opportunities to network outside of academia. I appreciate I've been talking probably for my time now, so I'd just really like to wrap up by saying that the message I really want to present is for those researchers in SHAPE disciplines that they are really well suited to a range of careers. There's certain things that we can do to really help them pursue those pathways and give them the information and support that they need. But just to emphasise really how in demand they are and should continue to be.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and that's a very positive message to end on. Really nice. So thank you very much. Let's go swiftly on to Freya, mindful that time is ticking on. So
yeah,
thank you, Freya.
I'll try and be quick. So I'm just going to quickly share some slides. Right, so slightly different from some of the other talks, but I'm going to talk about communicating science in the media as a potential sort of future career choice. I think the last few years of the pandemic have shown just quite how important it is that science is communicated accurately in the media. It determines whether people decide to take their vaccines and understand the risk of getting infected and the risk of severe disease and everything else that comes along with it. So it's a really interesting and important aspect of scientific research and part of the process of translating it to the public. It's kind of just, you might see a paper like this and how it gets to become this. And so there's a bunch of people like me who are busy working behind the scenes, helping scientists communicate their work. Very quickly, this is a pretty basic, simplified version of how articles tend to come to the public from a piece of scientific research. So you'll have a piece of work that is done, and a press office either at your university, a research charity, learned society museum, a hospital trust, or a journal will say, right, this is an important piece of work. We think the public needs to know about this. And so they'll write a press release, send it out to the journalists, normally under an embargo of a couple of days, which means there's a few days for the journalists that have access to this paper and research and press release to have a look into it, research around it, maybe get some third-party comments on it. And then once the embargo is over, it is then publicly available and you'll be able to read about it in the newspaper articles and on the news. So the press office section is where I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to very briefly say why I think it's such an important part of sort of the scientific community. It's not being a scientist as such or an academic, but it's still a really valuable sort of future career choice. You can see just quite how many people still get their news online via TV, social media and print. And if that information is misleading or wrong, that is a huge amount of misinformation. And you could be doing all the most amazing research in the world, but if the public don't know about it or think the wrong thing about it, it's not going to be having the impact that you would like it to have or that of your colleagues. And just again, just to really emphasize quite how large the impact can be of reaching these outlets and helping people understand new scientific research and innovation. So the role of a research press or communications officer is essentially to help academics communicate their research to the public or a specific target audience. It might not always be the mass public. My job at the Science Media Centre very much is reaching as many people as possible. What this looks like involves writing press releases. So you'll be working with academics at your organisation or institution and working with them to sort of write up a press release that explains what the research is saying and the limitations and the strength of the study and the implication. It might involve helping put journalists in touch with the right experts. So they might get in touch with you as a press office and say, I'd like to speak to someone about a particular topic, might be on COVID or monkeypox, and you'll help find the right expert for them to chat to and help maybe prepare a journalist for an interview, either with a written journalist, a sort of a newspaper journalist, or perhaps a broadcast interview. And it might also involve writing stories for the website or social media channels. So lastly, it could be for you if these are basically the reasons I love my job. If you enjoy the fast pace of the news media, it can be quite different from the pace of academia. Stories can change by the second, by the hour. And I just made a note of all the different topics I've worked on just today. And that includes monkeypox, COVID, antimicrobial resistance in farm animals, painkillers and chronic pain, sleeping pills, mindfulness in teenagers, and a potential new drug treatment option for Alzheimer's disease. So it's a very busy job. You'll be working on lots of different stories. If you're very good at multitasking and love the role of science in society and explaining it to a lay audience, it could be a really amazing job for you. And it's also, if you want to help the public understand these important scientific findings and endeavours, it's a really fruitful way to make a huge impact, because your work you can help scientists communicate their work to a huge number of people. And it's actually also just incredibly fun. And we often say, if you ever feel like shouting at the telly or the radio when you're listening to it saying, that's not true, that's wrong, that's normally a great sign that you'd be a great press officer. Just to wrap up finally, because I know we're very short on time, these are a few resources if you're interested in sort of dipping your toe into science communications. SciComm is a free mailing list, and it provides loads of forums for discussion and also a lot of jobs and volunteering opportunities in and around science communication, often broader than just media work. Stempra is a paid for informal network sort of membership body, but it's a reasonably cheap membership, and again offers opportunities for discussion and events and sharing information and expertise between science communication professionals. And then lastly, a plug for the Science Media Centre internship programme, where you get to sort of sit at the heart of a lot of science communication in the work that we do, see it from the inside, and maybe decide whether you would like to sort of take the chance at doing more science communication in your career. We will be opening applications soonish for the second half of this year, but I can share this link as well if you keep an eye on that link if you are interested in doing an internship with us. So sorry, I've really rushed through that, but I didn't want to take up too much time or go over. So let me finish screen sharing now. And that's, yes, sorry, quite a, yeah. Quick
thank you, Freya. That was really great, and thank you to all our speakers. I think we've had 4 fantastic presentations, which if people didn't know there were opportunities outside academia, I think they've had some really wonderful insights now. Dan, I don't know whether you think we've got time for one question. I'm sort of in your hands on this.
I think we might be a little short of time, but maybe what I can do is take these questions away. I can also summarise very quickly some of the questions that have come in just for information as well. I mean, I guess firstly, there's the acknowledgement that the innovation activities generally aren't linear, nor is the relationship between academia and industry. So that's worth thinking about. Whether there's more we can do as well to track the destinations of PGRs and maybe possibly feed those into discussions between senior researchers and early career researchers when they're having those conversations about careers. And also whether there's more we can do to promote something like apprenticeship schemes being one example, giving PhDs workplace experience. I guess more generally the joined up work that academia and industry do without necessarily having to leave a sector to be able to enjoy those experiences. So there's a few things for us to reflect on there, but we'll take the questions away and respond to them offline.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you to all our speakers. It's been a really great session. I'm sure we could spend all day talking about this, and it's such an interesting topic. But thank you for joining us, and I think it's time we moved on to the next session. See you all again soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.